Hey group, this is Justine here. How are you? I thought that since this was kind of a light video week, I might throw an extra one in. This is totally self-indulgent, so you can kind of be prepared for that. It's a bonus video. It's not in the curriculum. You can bow out. You don't have to watch it at all. But I just thought I'd throw it in there for two reasons. Primarily, um, because I think we get focused a lot on sort of European art when we talk about these kind of things, American art, and maybe we don't always look enough to other cultures. And if we do, it seems to always be Japan and comics. And well, we're not going to be talking about comics a lot here. We're going to be talking a lot about detailed imagery and depth and things like that. So one of the reasons I'm doing it is just to kind of add another culture into this mix. I'm not necessarily diversity obsessed, but when I am, I'm trying to find things that aren't normally spoken about when we try to include other cultures. India, for some reason, is often overlooked. That to me is a terrible shame because I'm a Sisha in Sanatana Dharma, which basically means convert to Hinduism. And I've got a bit of an obsession, not just with Indian spirituality, but also with Indian entertainment, Indian comics, Indian film, Bollywood, etc. So this is totally self-indulgent on my part, but maybe it'll just give you an idea of some other places to look for inspiration, for details, world building, um, you know, depth, so on and so forth. So feel free to enjoy, feel free to bow out at any time. I'm going to open up really with an image from really one of my favorite Bollywood films, Salvaria. And oh, by the way, I'm sitting on my front patio, and I live basically out in the woods on a swamp on the edge of a lake. So you're getting a lot of wildlife, and coming in through my window, you're probably hearing some chanting. Um, so you can just sort of ignore all the sounds of wind and nature and chanting. So anyway, back to this. This is from the film Salvaria, which is a film by Sanjay Leela Bhansali, who is my favorite Bollywood director. And there's a ton of details. His images, his films are full of elaborate sets, elaborate costumes, elaborate dance sequences, and elaborate emotional content as well. Even this image, which is fundamentally pretty simple, it's extremely detailed when you start looking at the rug, and then when you start looking at her earrings and the pattern on her clothing and everything else. This would make a gorgeous comic book panel. That rule of thirds, her author on the left-hand side, just that sliver of gold, that light coming through, and then the wonderful pattern of all this, really, though it's in the foreground, receding is in the narrative into the background. This is another image from the same film. A lot of people compare this to Moulin Rouge, which is really kind of funny because I think Moulin Rouge was very influenced by the rich, decadent sets in Bollywood. I love actually this composition, how this gold leads down to this actress, and this gold over here kind of balances that out, and the red of her dress balances out all these warm golds over here. So it's got a really nice flow. If you don't think this is a totally intentional, view a Bhansali film and see for yourself, particularly Salvaria or Bajiro Mastani. And even this goes totally back into cool, a little bit of neutral warm over here. So you really don't lose this wonderful flow going through here. This is another set piece from Salvaria. Great depth, really fabulous depth, and it's largely designed by layering, of course. We've got, this post here, which is a great foreground layer, the boat, which is a layer, I'm sorry, the bridge, the boat, which is another layer, and then this ridge, which is where the bridge ends, and then you've got the posts here, and you've got this border here, of course, the fountain, the path, the building itself, which kind of goes back into layers along these lovely posts. Then you've got this background layer, which comes across over here as well. Then we go down to these steps, another layer, then into deep space, and then yet another layer of involvement. All these stairs and bridges and entrances to mysterious places really raise the sense of mystery. What's this town like? What are these people like? Where are they going? What are they doing, and where are we going, and what are we doing within the context of the film? This applies equally well to any work you would do in comics, doesn't it? This is the same image we saw a moment ago with the actress sitting in front of it, but it's just a simple image of the sets themselves. Now we've gone to a great film by Mara Nair, Miranair, the film Kamasutra, which is an absolute masterpiece. Critically, I don't know that it did all that well, but most critics are men and they don't understand films about the emotions and female sexuality, which is most definitely what this film is about. The level of details in the costuming is absolutely delicious. Even the purple down here, which at least in medieval English times, and this may have been so in India, I'm not certain about this historically, these were dyes that were not afforded by the common person, these purple colors. So I have a feeling that's what's going on here on the prints. But then start looking at the wonderful textures and all the beauty going on in her costuming. I love that earring hanging over there, the forehead piece. The details are absolutely exquisite. This is the prints, and while it doesn't really seem like a detailed image, there are lots of little luscious details. The beads here, all these beautiful folds, the texture of the fabric, this fabulous, fabulous jewel up here, and all the great stuff going on in the background. It's a really lovely, sort of deceptively simple image. This is the teacher from Kamasutra. I love the pattern, and I love how this earthy pattern is sort of reflected over here on the earthy walls and doors and everything. She just sort of like emerges from this background, like she's just a part of it, you know? And then we get into the details of all the bangles and the jewelry and the red fingers and all of this. And all of this really is culturally so in India. So whether you're talking about a film like Bajirao Mastani, which is, you know, old India, or whether you're talking about Salvaria, which is sort of like new Bollywood India, you know, you're really looking at the same level of detail, the same quality of accessorization, the same sort of decorative elements. This is the same actress, same film, fabulous. Love the peacock. What a great detail on the costuming. Fabulous up here. I love the kind of balancing act of having these two women back here. Pretty well obscured, but they add some nice balance. You've got the two women here, her, and then balanced out by this. And the strength of this tree is really fabulous too. Same film, Kamasutra. This is the wedding scene. Just, I'm not going to talk a lot about it. There's just a lot to take in, right down to the mehendi here. Another one from Kamasutra, and the lead character in this film falls in love with a sculptor who's working on Indian temple sculptures. And we're going to look at a couple of those sculptures in particular in just a second. And this is how he's seeing her, or actually how he's seeing his work. He's becoming concerned that he's become too fixated on her for his work, and being a self-centered male artist, he can't handle this and wants to dump her. But anyway, we all know the story. So we're going to look at a couple of these temple sculptures that this film was sort of based upon. I think this is from Khajuraho is the name of the temple, if I pronounced that correctly. So here's a nice close-up of one of those sculptures, and I love the very lifelike sort of weight, the very lifelike sense of belly fat and so forth is really beautiful. And this stuff's pretty detailed, but it gets even more stunning as we pull away. Basically, there's that image we're just looking at a moment ago, I think. Or something very similar to it. Nope, that's the one. Everything's broken in the same place, and here are these figures. So you can see as we pull away, you know, we've got this level of detail going on in the images for all the jewelry and all the accessories, all the costuming and hair is highly detailed. Then we pull back, and we start seeing insane levels of detail throughout the entire temple. Pull back even further, and it gets even more crazy with the details. We break down into patterning up here, which is fantastic, beautiful. And there's the full temple itself, which, as a piece of architecture, is elaborately detailed. So we've zoomed in on this temple. This image here. This image here. This image, of course. Right to a modern film about, you know, the making of that temple, essentially. Another great detail from the same temple. Fantastic. Everything I just said a moment ago is so. Look at the details of all these little figures crammed up in here. Truly terrific. Okay, this is from Bajirao Mastani, another Sanjay Leela Bhansali film, one of my favorites from 2015. Absolutely a must-see. The dance numbers are sensational. The emotional content is sensational. And you have to look at it as an operatic myth. If you try to look at it as something realistic, if you try to look at it from a Western bias, you'll sit and snicker at the film. But that's not how Bollywood works. Bollywood is about high emotion. You know, it's really about high emotion. It's also about mythic, heroic stories. So They don't have to be gritty, tortured, realistic heroes like all of our nonsense movies. These can be real mythic heroes doing unlikely and impossible things. Anyway, this is a very detailed, very beautiful scene. Fantastic structure they filmed this in. Another great scene from Mastani. Same dance sequence. This might have been towards the conclusion. God, look how delicious it is. Everything about it. Look at the details in costuming down here. All these amazing details in the costuming. Belly chains. Look at that. Absolutely fantastic. All these lights back here. Notice again that we're getting into the groupings, you know? So even though it's not a comic or a drawing, we've got this really strong shape in the foreground, which is elaborately patterned and very, very hot red. Then we've got a grouping of vertical figures back here, a grouping of sort of vertical architectural elements, and little groupings of lights. Really, really organized well. Holds together as beautiful as any great illustration. Now we're talking about ACK Comics. These are the Indian comics where a lot of Indians really discovered their Indianness through these comics, it is said. This is something that Ananti Pai, Uncle Pai, as they would call him, the man who founded these comics, when he first started telling these stories, he wanted to leave out some of the more spectacular sort of elements of the mythology, like Krishna lifting a mountain with one finger. He just didn't think a modern audience would go for that. This is the problem with the colonial mind in India, colonialized mind in India, that people like Rajiv Malhotra are trying to fight against. But Nanti Pai came around on his own. He was out in the street and he heard people talking, and someone said, well, this is how it says in ACK Comics, so it must be so. And what Ananti Pai realized was that these comics were considered a valid way to get Indian mythology, to learn about Indian mythology. So he started realizing he had to be much more true to the details of his own stories. And he was always very true to the details of the visuals. He sends his artists out to research things. He's very, very adamant about getting the costuming right, all the period stuff right, the temples right. I've never been an enormous fan of the style of the work, but the truth in the details are really lovely. Just another great ACK comic, great detail of the Shiva Lingam. Shiva, of course, being one of the Trinity in Hinduism, but all the details of how it's decorated, the three lines of Shiva here, the leaf on top, the meditation positions, truly fantastic. Cover from the Rama comic. Now this is an important detail as well. Ananti Pai didn't consider, even though he had a responsibility to really go into these comics with some authenticity and historical accuracy, he didn't actually think of them as being holy. And there's something in India called darshan, which is the glance between the devotee and the murti, which often people kind of misconceive in the West. Indians is a bunch of idol worshippers, but the idol is a representation of an idea of God and houses, God is something you can meditate upon. Just as in America we think a flag is so important you shouldn't burn it, but the murti become very important. But that glancing into the eyes is an important part of the tradition of India, and Nanti Pai didn't want eye contact being made between the viewer and the comic covers, because these comic covers were not being made by artists who were trained in the tradition of creating holy artwork. So that's a really cool detail that you'll see if you look at god paintings. There's direct eye contact between the viewer and the god. If you look at murti, there's direct, the temple statues, there's direct eye contact. But if you look at the comics, there's rarely eye contact between the god and the viewer. I have got the most fascinating bug crawling up my computer right now. Looks like some sort of little tiny praying mantis. It's fantastic. Anyway, so here's Hindu holy art. These are the god prints, the god posters that would be in Indian homes and all over the place. And this, of course, is Lord Ganesh. And notice he's making direct contact with you, the viewer. And this is so that you can look directly into the eyes of the Supreme. Everything in his hands, all these hand positions are extremely symbolic, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And look at the lush details, but how you immediately, not only do you immediately go to Ganesh, you immediately go to the eyes. And this yellow globe, it makes that very clear, especially with the blue, the cool blues and the cool greens behind it. I love Indian god prints. They're really fantastic. This is a nice one that kind of just tells you the symbolism of every single element in these prints. In fact, if you're really into this, there are a series of YouTube videos about God prints. I think they're called like Seven Secrets of series from Epiphi, and they're all done by a really, really cool Indian writer, Dave Dutt Patanayak. Oh my god, I mangled that on the video. Sorry, guys. Anyway, you can find it on YouTube, and it'll break down all the different symbols just as this does and what they mean if you're interested in such a thing. So nothing in Indian god art is accidental. And I think you can see, looking through these images of gods, that whether it's Bollywood or the images of gods or comics in India, the attention to detail and the elaborateness of the details is really a deep part of the culture. This is, of course, Kali, which many people mistakenly think has conquered Shiva, but what this really represents is, you know, her trying to arouse Shiva into participating in the world here. And of course, all of these elements have symbols, which, these are all symbolic elements that have meaning, which you can learn about on your own. This is Narasimha, who was manifestation of Lord Vishnu. These cobras being a symbol of Vishnu, these all being things that Vishnu carries. This club, as I understand it, is for when the devotees don't get the point, and Vishnu has to basically bonk them on the head. So this is one of my favorite stories, and this is really a fabulous sort of modern take on the image. It could be old, but it looks modern to me. Here's a variation. And then getting ancient, fabulous temple, same kind of image. And you can see the tradition's the same, some of the style changes, but the elaborateness, the attention to detail, all that remains the same. So I hope you enjoyed this little bonus. Sorry it's a little impromptu, wasn't terribly, well thought through. I just threw it together for you guys, and I hope it was cool. Bye. Oh, forgot about these. When you walk into a Hindu temple, be prepared for lavish amounts of details. That's the goddess Durga there. And of course the Shiva Lingam, which is fundamentally a very, very simple shape. And it's all very symbolic, in fact, if you want to talk about metaphor and symbolism. The lingam itself partially represents the column of fire that Shiva had produced to settle an argument between the gods. But it's also very clearly, as it is said over and over again, a phallic symbol coming up through the yoni, the vaginal opening, which you can see is what this is representative of. So this is a symbol of the merging of the male and the female powers of Shiva and Shakti, right? The female energy of Shiva and Parvati or Sati, his wives. And lastly, this is a Shiva lingam, but fully decorated on a holy day. And you can see that the details and elaborate decor become quite luscious and quite beautiful, starting at a point like that and ending at a point like that. Anyhow, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this. I'm sorry it was a little disorganized, but I just kind of threw it together as a little bonus for you guys to get you through the weekend before the next video's up. Talk to you soon. See you later.